thank you so much for taking the time to listen a little bit about peppers, a passion that I have, and I just really hope you learned something today, even just one thing. So yeah, really let's get into it. I think the important thing here that I really want to stress about is kind of my passion for gardening. I was born in Michoacan, Mexico. I was brought over here as a child with my family when we immigrated from Mexico. I have about 25 years of gardening experience. Ever since I was a child, I was around plants. I started picking strawberries from the age of 7. This is back before we had strict laws on kids, as you know. But my father was a farmer. He was always around plants, growing corn, growing peppers, growing abundant amount of fruits in his garden in Mexico. And my mom worked her whole life in plant nurseries, always around plants. So there was always such a passion of growing, plants and just, identifying with everything and the dishes that they provide for us with the fruit that we grow and the harvest that we have year after year growing up is very important to me. As you can see, here are some of the pictures of my current garden right now. If you can look at the picture in the middle, that has been one of my best cherry seasons of the year that I've had, since I was a kid. And this was actually a couple of years ago in 2022. And to tell you the amount of cherries that I ate that year would not do justice. Had a couple tummy aches, but that's okay. Outside of that, I love to, just to experiment with different things, growing peaches, donut peaches, peppers. Again, like I said, peppers is my passion. Peppers is something I like to grow because I love my food spicy. I'm very, very particular when I go eat my tacos. I will definitely lower a taco place lower if their salsa is not spicy because I love my food spicy. Outside of gardening, I am the Juntos coordinator for Washington County, Multnomah, and Clackamas County, where I work with mainly Latino and Latina families in these counties, where I help them figure out what their next step is for post high school graduation, community college, university, whatever it is. I help prepare them by helping them apply to financial aid, scholarships, and anything in between that they might need. So that is my day job. And this is a way that I love to relax in the evenings is by working on my garden. And as you may have already thought it, I was working in my garden today with this beautiful sunny day. But let's go. That's a little bit about me. I know you didn't come to hear about me. You came to hear about peppers. So let's get it going. All right. So let's get it. Let's talk about peppers. So these are my bounty. If you can see that picture right there, that is a beautiful, spicy devil's tongue pepper. That is one of my best pictures that I took a couple of years ago, and that plant was grown from seed. These are grown from seed. Everything that we do here is grown from seed. Whether these are seeds that we purchase locally or we purchased online, or just seeds that we have left over from peppers that we've grown in the past years. But this is just a beautiful picture that I love to share with people because peppers can be beautiful, can come in all different colors, and um, you know, just taste just as great. So, just a little bit about me. All right, so what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk a little about seeds, when and where to buy seeds. We're going to talk about outdoor prep, planting care, when to move outdoors and keep them alive. This is a big, big part of growing peppers. I know that when we see sunny weather, we start thinking about it's time to start planting things outside, but sometimes we call a little too early. And unfortunately, when we bring them out, we get another frost or just something happens and our plants don't survive. So I'm going to teach you a little bit about that and when to harvest, how to harvest. And I'm also going to go ahead and include a little bit about how you can dry peppers. You might want to also learn about some fresh drinks that you can make out of some of the vegetables or fruits that you're growing in your garden that may aid you in cooling down after you've made yourself a spicy salsa, because I will be giving you a salsa recipe that I've used in my cooking for the last 15 to 20 years. So let's talk a little bit about it. Now, seeds. When should you start buying seeds? This is a big question. So it really kind of depends in your region, where you're living. But here in this area in Washington County, Multnomah County, I highly recommend to start buying seeds between January, early February. If you can, maybe late December. I know we're thinking it's winter. Why should we start buying these things? Why should we start buying seeds this early on, right? Well, the thing is that it takes a while for the seeds to germinate and for them to sprout. It takes months in and months out. So, as you know, January, February, March are very cold seasons. So it's going to take a while for these seeds to sprout. So the earlier that you can plant them, the better. I will say this. I don't want to discourage anybody, but if you haven't started to plant your seeds, it's going to take a little bit longer. It's going to, you're not going to be harvesting until winter, but don't worry. I'm going to give you tips and suggestions that you could probably use in order to, still harvest some of these peppers and enjoy them into the winter time, right? As we get into the cold season. But ideally, you're going to want to buy them in early January, early February, and also start planting them. Also, make sure that you're inspecting these seeds. I always get this question of how to inspect seeds. It's a very difficult thing that I haven't mastered myself yet. But one of the things I like to look at, and that's a dead giveaway. Sometimes there will be a little bit of fungus, a little bit of decay on these seeds. If you notice that, just go ahead and throw them away. I know that there have been comments or videos posted up there, especially now with like TikTok and social media, where people are saying are talking about if your seeds flow, that means that they're not viable anymore, or if they sink, they're not more viable. But again, this isn't backed up by science. We don't know, if this is 100% factual. So again, the best thing that you could do is pass the eye test. I will say that 100% of the seeds that you buy from the packet are not going to grow. You might have 50, 60, 70% germination rate. But that's just something that we have to work with, unfortunately. So again, when you're buying seeds, think about that. How many seeds are really going to germinate? How many seeds will grow into seedlings? The more you have, the more likely that you're going to produce seedlings in the coming months, right? So just something to kind of consider. Other things that you could definitely do to help and to help identify, you may have seen this in our Washington County extension services, even with Multnomah County. But there have been people who have soaked their seeds, who have seen some good success rate with soaking their seeds overnight. That is a common practice that we've done in our household. Myself, my girlfriend, my family, also even my parents have done that. So it's a good way to soak them. Is it necessary? Not really, but we feel like there is a benefit to them and gives us a head start. You could also damp a cloth. Damp a cloth. Now, damping a cloth in water, putting your seeds in these damp cloths, and putting them in a sealed bag, maybe one of those ones that have the nice little lock on them that you slide across and you lock, and you put them in a warm spot, maybe above, near a chimney, if you have a wood stove, near a window, or a place that's going to be real nice and warm, that's going to keep them nice and toasty. They will, after about 10 days, you'll be able to see if these seeds have germinated, because you'll start to see them sprout a little bit, right? So that's something to consider as an option if you want to see if these seeds will be germinating over the next couple of days. So it's just a good way for you not to be disappointed if you put them in soil and they don't grow or they don't pop out. So um, one other thing, just to keep in mind, keep seeds indoor. Keep seeds indoor. If you have the space, you have the option, maybe in a bedroom, in the bathroom or something, some place where it's warm and it has some light, some maybe some direct sunlight, it'd be ideal. But you're gonna want to keep them in temperatures between 68 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the proper, temperature for plants, for seeds to germinate. So keeping it to that temperature would be ideal. Anything colder than that, the likelihood of things to germinate might not work out. I've known people who have used those little heat mats that have worked very well for them. I have a wood stove, and I keep my plants near my wood stove when and I'm keeping it going throughout the day and the evening, and they do very well. So as long as they get a good 10 to 12 hours of nice warmth, they are going to germinate perfectly. And again, typically germination could be anywhere from 5 to 10 days or even 14 days max. There may be some that come in a bit later, but that's okay. They're still considered seedlings. Everything is good. All right. Again, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm going to try to answer them at the end of the session, get to them as possible, and hopefully, you know, answer anything that you may have. All right. Seeds, potting. Now, let's talk about this. It is super important that we have a rich nutrient soil that our seeds will grow in, right? Buying a great seed start is solid and crucial for the process of germinating the seeds, right? One thing that I really, really recommend is try to buy local. Buy local soil at your different nurseries. I bought the soil that I use now. I live in Cornelius, Oregon, and I go to Stark's Nursery, which is right near North Plains, right outside of Hillsboro. And when I first started, I had questions, and they were able to answer some of my questions because they've been in the business for a long time. And I love making those connections because now I go to them every year. They have my stuff ready. By the time that I need them, they'll give me a call like, "Hey, Ezekiel, we've got some plant soil early for you. Or are you interested in this?" So I really support local businesses like that. I think it's really great. Make good connections, and they will help answer some of the questions that you may have. But a good seed start soil is crucial for germination. I would really, really recommend not to use, and I'll talk a little bit about more, but I would really recommend not to use compost soil because there could be a lot of different bacteria and pathogens that might not necessarily be ideal for seeds. I like to think seeds as kids. When we have kids, we're trying to keep them away from all these germs as newborns and babies and things like that. So we don't want to expose them around all these different, colds and bacteria and things like that until they grow a little bit older and bigger and stronger, and they have their defenses up, a good immune system. It's very similar to seeds. We can't expose them to them early on. They're great when we're ready to pot them or ready to put them in a bed or in the soil or putting them outside. That's a great time. They're going to be exposed to that, but by that time they've built up enough defenses and they're good to go and good to grow. Um, when you're planting seeds in soil, again, all they need is water and heat, some nice warmth. I talked about the 68 to 86 degrees roughly for Fahrenheit. That's all they need. You don't need to add anything extra. You don't need to add any type of fertilizer or anything like that. Just a good, rich soil is all you really need for them to be for them to pop out. And you just got to take a quick look at them and make sure everything is good every once in a while. Don't overdo it with the water. If you have a nice little spritzer, nice little I don't know what they're called in English. My my English and Spanish goes back and forth, but just a little sprayer that you can kind of spray the top of them. You don't need to be dumping water on them. If you have that, that would be an ideal situation because I think sometimes our hand can be a little bit heavy and we can tend to drown those seeds. So a nice little spritzer will go a long way. All right. All right. Let me see. Let's move forward here. So again, now I'm actually going to go back one. I forgot one thing. Pepper seeds. Pepper seeds. I know people have asked me in the past, can I sow them directly into the soil? You can, but it's not ideal. The reason why is because peppers take a very, very long time for them to grow from seed to seedling and then into pepper plants and into producing a harvest for you, producing fruit, peppers rather in this conversation, right? So it takes a very, very long time. So I would not recommend planting seeds directly into the soil because if you're going to be doing this, you're really not going to start planting your seeds into the soil until about late May, and you're probably not going to be harvesting or you're not going to produce anything until late September, maybe October. And by that time, we typically have a lower temperature and we have our first frost around that time. So it's better to start your plants indoors. So sowing directly into the ground isn't ideal. Is it ideal for other things like maybe pumpkins and cucumbers? Yes, because they generally take a little bit shorter time span for them to grow and for them to produce fruit. So do not sow directly into the soil, especially in our temperature. If you're living elsewhere outside of Oregon, maybe where the temperature is a little bit hotter, that might be a good option, but it's not something that I put into practice here. Also, you don't need fancy containers. Don't worry about fancy containers. Having these little pots that you're buying at Home Depot or local garden stores that are separated into little areas where you can put your soils. You don't need that. The thing, this what I'm using here, this picture that you see in front of me. Hopefully, everybody can see it, right? These are just vegetable containers that I bought, like salad mixes in from my local friend Myers. That's really all it is. I keep them when I'm buying salads when I'm running short out of time. Like I buy them and I pick them up, and then I just save them. I save containers. It's actually funny. I meant to post a picture of this on here, but I had an old I bought a blanket at a Macy's, and it has a zipper on it. It closes up and everything. It's a nice big. I just put soil in there, put seeds in there, close it up, water it, and it was just a perfect environment for it because I could seal it. The moisture was in there. It would stay nice and warm next to my fireplace, similar to this right here. It's creating moisture barrier because I'm able to close it. So you don't need to spend money on these fancy pots or little starter kits or anything like that. Something simple like that. You can go ahead and grow peppers. As you can see, mine are doing very well. I've actually started to move my stuff outside now with this nice weather. So again, just whatever you have at home will work. Be innovative, recycle, use what you have. I am trying to lower my carbon footprint. So if you have this, perfect, ideal. What more do you need? All right, prepping for outdoors. What do I need to start doing? Right, number one thing, we got to pay attention to the weather. Right, we all know that March and April are very unpredictable times in the Pacific Northwest. We've had years where in April we've had snow, we've had really cold temperatures. So it's definitely important to start kind of playing it by ear, look at the weather channel and seeing, what the temperatures are going to be for the next couple of weeks. If we have a few days and a few steady weeks, which is hard to find steady weeks here in Oregon with good weather, but if we're starting to have temperatures that are hovering right around the 60 degrees, I think it would be really a good opportunity for you to start kind of taking your plants outside, start introducing them to the weather, just to start getting accustomed to the environment, to the air, to the cold. Because again, just like all of us, we have to kind of get used to the environment that we're in and the weather. So it's a good recommendation that if you have a few plants, take them outside for a little bit, maybe on the weekend or in the afternoon, a couple of hours, or if you work from home, take them out while you're working, bring them back in at night, just something to start introducing. Or if you have a nice little greenhouse, start putting them out in the greenhouse. I have a small little makeshift greenhouse that I made that's butted up against my house. It's 6 by 6 by 7, and I just put my plants in there. The warmth of my house keeps these plants going. Even in colder temperatures, I've been able to actually keep lime trees in there that have not died and actually continue to produce throughout the winter. So it's just something that I would recommend if you can make one, or if you're just take them out for a couple of hours, that would be ideal. But again, just making sure that we're keeping track of the weather and the forecast, because it could definitely be what does you in and doesn't allow your plants to grow. All right, so big question that I get from people all the time: raised beds, grounds, pots, what's better? Really, it just really depends on the space that you have, what's available to you. I want everybody to grow plants. I'm not a gatekeeper. I am not going to tell people grow one way or the other. I want you to grow peppers for whatever, works for you specifically, right? If you have the space and it looks aesthetically pleasing, yes, raised beds look great. If you have small pets like I have, 4 dogs, and they can be little rascals, they can go ahead and, jump on my plants because I plant everything directly into the ground. So with the space that I have, so maybe raised beds would be ideal for people. It's also a nice way where you can kind of remove the soil every once in a while. It's easy to get to, easy to access, easy to water. Less weeds, specifically, within garden beds. There's a lot less weeds, which weeds can be a deterrent for your plants to grow. So definitely something you want to consider with the space that you have. I personally am used to potted plants and to planting my peppers into the ground directly. Now, it's important that we understand this. When I when I pot my plants, I do a couple of things, right? After they're done, after they're germinated and they start to grow a little bit, they're about maybe an inch to 2 inches. So around these next couple of weeks, as you noticed in my picture, the pepper plants were very, very close together. What I'll start doing at that point is I'll start separating them out and putting them into smaller individual pots, very small pots, and I'll start putting them in potting soil. So remember, we use seedling soil to get them started. Now we're transitioning them into a richer nutrient environment that has a little bit more bacteria that's going to help growing it. So we're going to put these into potting soil. Potting soil is probably the last type of soil that we're going to purchase because we want to keep them in that type of soil. So I start separating them out, putting them in these little containers and or whatever I have available to me, add that potting soil. And after I do that, I do two things. I start planting them into the ground. I start planting them in the ground after I've tilled into the work, which I'll talk a little about here in a little bit, or I'll put them into bigger pots. So the reason I do both is because I understand, I know that everything that I grow, or even if it's already a 2 to 3 foot plant, I know depending on the weather, depending on a lot of other factors, I know that I might not be able to harvest before the first frost, right? Even, because peppers take a very, very long time to grow here in Oregon. And I might not be able to start, harvesting these peppers until maybe October. So the nice thing about having potted plants is one, if you don't have the space or a big enough backyard where you can plant raised beds or plant directly into the ground, you can plant them in larger pots. They will grow. They will grow just as good as being in a raised bed or in the ground. But also you have the ability to move them indoors. So if it's late in the season, you've planted things late, like I mentioned, some of you maybe have not who are on this, conversation right now in the Zoom meeting may have not planted your pepper seeds at this moment. And maybe are going to do them now. Maybe this will be a good advantage for you to start practicing planting some of these seeds in a pot, keeping them in a pot, because the likelihood of them being ready to harvest might not happen until late October. Again, they could be susceptible to the frost and die, and we don't want that, especially after all the time and effort we spent on them. So it would be a nice thing for you to bring them inside, keep them inside, and they will continue to grow. They will continue to grow for the next 3 to 4 months. I've had success with that with a lot of my peppers that we maybe feel that are very delicate and maybe susceptible to climate change and climate shifts, during the span of summer to fall to winter, that have done really well indoors at a temperature of 50 to 60 degrees, right? So they do really well. So I am a huge fan of keeping peppers in pots because, again, it's easy for me to bring indoors. It's easy also for me if I don't have direct sunlight, where I can continuously move them into direct sunlight because pepper plants specifically, need that direct sunlight for a minimum of 8 to 10 hours for them to grow properly. So that's another thing too. Potted plants is a huge advantage, especially for those of us who are just now starting to plant peppers from seeds. Now, I, if you ask me why in ground, it's just something I'm used to. It's just something that I grew up with. I grew up with my dad, watching my dad, with his tiller in the backyard, moving the dirt, moving everything, everything I got from my dad. So it's just a habit, right? It's just a habit that I do. And I love it. I love working outside, working with my dogs. I'm out there tilling, they're out digging holes. I think they're helping me. They're probably looking for other things, right? But I like to see it as that we're all out there together. I'm out there, with my family working on it. And I really, really do enjoy the process of just putting them into the ground. When I put them into the ground, I really do try to make sure that um, after they're in those small little pots, they're about, maybe 3 to 4 inches tall, and I'm ready to put them out. Generally, I'll start putting things into the ground in about May, right? At the end of May, once the weather has stabilized a little bit, when I know that we're going to have temperatures above 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That way, I know that there won't be any issues with colder temperatures. So, rule of thumb for me is here in the Pacific Northwest, if you can hold off on planting or putting your plants outside, planting your peppers in the garden until maybe middle of May, end of May, that is going to be ideal for all of us. But I generally just, I love the work of putting um, plants directly into the ground. I'll share some pictures here at the end so you can see kind of what my garden looks like at that stage of where everything's outside. But it is a little bit work. It's a little bit tough for your body. I do have to put some fencing around to keep my pets. But for me, it's a little aesthetically pleasing because I love seeing everything in the ground. And it's also closer to my roots and closer to what my grandparents did, growing up in Mexico. So it's just something that reminds me of them, and I love to do that work. All right. So now, so this is very important too. I know I skipped. I kind of went over this a little bit of ago too. But when we start unpotting things, as I mentioned, it's going to be roughly in May. When once we again we're going back to the process of we do the seed mix for the germination of the seeds. Then once they get to about an inch or 2 inches, what we want to do is we're going to start putting them in smaller individual pots. We can start separating them a little bit. Don't be afraid. Again, this is a part I forgot I neglected to mention a little bit ago. Don't be afraid of pulling apart. If they're so close together, the seedlings, don't be afraid to pull them apart. You're not going to damage them. It's perfectly okay. They'll be fine, but you got to make sure that when you're transitioning from seedling to potting soil, you give it enough soil, give it a little generous amount of water. You can go into using your hose or your sprayer, whatever you want to use, but give it a good bath of water because it's going to need that water because a lot of them could lose a few of them because of the trauma from being separated. But again, if you give it a generous amounts of water, you're perfectly okay. Now, I don't generally start to fertilize my peppers um, until I've put them into the ground or I've taken them outside. Even when I'm potting them, I won't put fertilizer in them. I think just water and heat and the temperature outside is more than enough. When you do start taking them outside, when they're a little bit bigger, like I said, maybe 3 to 4 inches in height, that's when you can start fertilizing them. So giving them an advantage, especially when you're taking them outside. But I never do that when I've gone from step one, which is seedling, germination to seedling, to potting them a little bit bigger, right? I never fertilize them. That's just something I've, done and it's always worked out for me. You may hear something from somebody else, but just try what works out for you. Again, I also want to make sure this is said really well. None of my stuff that I do is based off of science. My degree isn't in science. My degree isn't in this. It's just something that I've done for the vast majority of my life, something I enjoy doing, and something I wanted to share with you. But this isn't science based. It's just things that I've seen that work for me. All right. In beds. So just kind of prepping everything. I think right now would be a perfect time to start kind of looking at everything that you're doing right now, especially now that the sun's out a little bit later. This weekend would be a perfect way to start prepping your garden, getting rid of some weeds in your garden, start tilling the ground. If you have raised beds, I think it would be good to just kind of move the dirt around, add more soil. If you need more soil, that's the one thing about raised beds that I generally, do tell folks that if you are going to be working with raised beds, making sure you're adding new potting soil into your mixture would be ideal, because of the lack of nutrients that are ripped out when you are harvesting the year before. So adding a little bit more of that would be great. Moving it, transitioning, perfect. Now, if you're putting them directly in the ground and you have a tiller, like I do, I till it twice in this next couple of months. I till it right now in April, so I'll actually be tilling out this weekend. So I'll till out the areas, and then we expect a couple more weeks of heavy rain here in April. So that'll loosen up the soil a little bit, allow for that flow of water, and then the next couple of weeks of rain that we're going to get to kind of seep down in there. It will close up a little bit if you are tilling into the ground. Just the type of soil that we have here in Oregon will tighten up a little bit, will close up. So it will need another tilling in May. Ideally, what you want to do is if you are going to be tilling in May, make sure that you line up your planting cycle when you're gonna start planting your peppers outside to like maybe like a week, like a couple of days or a week after you've tilled, start putting it into the ground because again, if the soil starts to compact again, gets tight, you're gonna have to till again. So don't let more than a week pass after you till to start planting your peppers. All right. So planning and care. Again, when to move plants. Again, plants thrive outdoor weather. 7 degrees or higher would be ideal, but we know that sometimes in May we can't expect that. So around 60, 65 degrees, you should definitely be okay to start planting your peppers outside, taking them outside. Again, as I mentioned, ideal time to do that is the end of May. So if you are able to do that, please hold off. As I mentioned, the number one reason why people's plants don't survive outside is because we take them out a little bit too early, and especially plants that are very young are very susceptible to cold weather. So, again, rule of thumb: last couple of weeks in May or the end of May would be ideal. Also, don't fear that spring, that late spring rain that we have in June. You know that rain I'm talking about. That rain in June, where it's just breaking down really, really hard, which ruins my cherry trees. The last year, it ruined my cherry trees and my cherries. So that late spring rain won't affect them negatively in any way. It'll actually be an advantage for them. So don't be afraid of that. The number one thing, but one thing that I bring up, number one thing you should always be worried about is pests. And I'm not talking about bugs or anything like that. I am talking about birds, or if you live out in an area where maybe you have a neighbor who has chickens. I know my neighbor has chicken coops. Um, we actually, unfortunately, had birds eating our young pepper plants at a very, very early age. They were a couple inches, tall, and it was at the beginning of June, and they were just pecking the top of it, and they were killing these pepper plants. These poor pepper plants were not going to survive if it kept going. Um, a simple fix that I did, that also where I didn't have to cause any harm to any animals. I went to my local dollar store and I bought a bunch of different balloons, those very, very shiny balloons. And I actually just taped them around the area, the little fence area to the ground, to a rock, just in different areas. And the noise and the shining of these balloons deterred birds and rats away from my pepper plants, and it worked. So just a small little tip there, because you just gotta, understand the environment you're living, the surroundings, because you will have some pests that could eat away at some of these plants. So just something to consider. The cheap fix is doing that. And how I picked that up, as I mentioned, I picked berries all my life since I was 8 years old up until I was 18. I saw this constantly done at blueberry farms with CDs. Some of you here remember CDs. CDs. I used to hang up CDs, and it was a way to scare away predators. So just something to think about. All right. So when planting peppers into the ground or in a garden bed, one of the things you want to make sure is you space them out enough. A foot to a foot and a half is ideal. If you can space them a little bit more, given the space that you have, it would be for optimal growth, because they will grow up and will grow out. So we want to make sure they have plenty of room to grow, because if they don't have plenty of room to grow, one plant may survive, the other may not, or in a worst case scenario, both plants will not grow. Weather-wise, again, rule of thumb: weather, weather, weather. Make sure you're checking your forecast before you're moving these plants out. Again, we live in Oregon. We know that sometimes the weather can be a little wacky, so please pay attention to the weather, specifically when we're starting to move our plants outside. But again, a safe bet is by the middle of June, by the middle of May rather, and end of May is going to be the ideal temperature for you to start moving plants outside. Now, water. When should I water my plants now that they're in the garden beds and when they're outside? Again, rule of thumb when watering plants is never do it in the middle of the day, especially in a hot, hot day. If you can water your plants early in the morning before you leave to work, maybe around 6, 7 a.m., 8 a.m. at the latest, start watering your plants as early as possible. If you can't get to them in the morning, make sure that you start watering them once sundown, maybe 8:30, 9 o'clock. Go outside once there's not direct sunlight. The direct sunlight in the water can actually harm the plants, and it can actually burn them, can turn them yellow. So if you see some pepper plants or even some bushes that you see that brown yellow coloration, generally it's because they are being watered in the middle of the day during a very hot day. So I definitely recommend that you do it early in the morning. I'm not telling you to get up at 5 in the morning, but if you're an early riser and you want to water your plants before you go on your walk or go work out, or walk your dogs, whatever it may be, great. But again, before it starts getting really, really hot. But also, again, this is where you want to pay attention to the weather, making sure that you that you understand when it's going to be really, really hot and when, the weather is going to start moving up. So definitely, if it's going to get 80 degrees by 8 or 9 a.m., we've had that in the past. Please make sure that you're watering your plants early. That's going to keep them from dying on you. Fertilization. I typically will only fertilize my pepper plants every couple of weeks. Won't do it more than that. If you do it more than that, you may be experiencing some over fertilization. Signs of over fertilization: yellowing and wilting of lower parts of the leaves. They'll start dying. They'll start breaking on you. Browning of leaves. You see the little tips of the plants are a little bit brown and dampened. The roots just look very, very weak. You start seeing leaves fall off. That generally will be a sign of over fertilization. You don't need a whole lot of fertilizer. Just you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, a lot less goes a long way. That's what I wanted to say. So every couple of weeks, perfectly fine. But these are the signs that you should definitely be looking for if you are over fertilizing your plants. All right, pinching. This is a word that I've heard all my life. Never understood it until I got older. But basically, what pinching is, or what could also be known as topping. When you're planting your plants outside, when they've reached about a foot, even it could be even 5 to 6 inches or even a foot. Ideally, I would say between 5 to 6 inches to a foot. Once they start growing at that length, what you're gonna want to do is, as you notice, you can go. You notice in the picture, grab a pair of scissors and just top off that little portion that has about 5 to 6 leaves. Just cut it off a little. The reason you're going to want to cut that off is because you're going to want to make sure that the plant starts growing outwards versus upwards, right? What happens is, if a plant continues to grow up, if we don't top this, if you don't top it, you could be fine. You need to make some adjustments as time goes on, later down the road in the summertime, to make sure it's stable. But they will continue to grow, and it will have a very, very weak root, very weak base. So topping plants or pinching them, because you again, pinching comes from putting your index finger and your thumb together and pinching them off, and just taking that little top portion off. That's where pinching comes from. But again, you can do it with scissors if you like. Um, and what that'll do is, again, it'll make the plants grow outwards, have a great base, and it will make sure that your pepper plant is nice and full and stable. But it's a term that I've heard all my life, and I try to do this every single year. Has there been years where I forgot to? Yes. Were they okay? Some of them were okay, but like I mentioned earlier, I did have to do a little bit of backtracking and helping these plants stabilize a little bit. And by stabilizing, I would just grab a stick or a branch, pop it next to it, tie a rope around it, small little rope or string around it, just so it would keep it standing upright and not falling over. Because peppers plants can be heavy. The peppers can be heavy as they start growing and could topple it over. So again, we wanted to grow outwards, not upwards. And then bud pitching. Also, don't be afraid to remove some of the flower buds early on, especially as you are planting them out, because there are going to be some pepper plants that do produce early flowers early on as you are starting to move them outside. It happens. Don't be afraid to pinch those off. What will happen is, it will actually aid the plant in being stronger, fuller, and similar to what we're doing with pinching. It will give it the sign to hold off on producing more pepper flowers, and allow it to grow outwards and not upwards. Because if we grow early peppers on a very, very weak plant, it's going to fall over, and it's probably going to break and die on you. So don't be afraid to remove some of those early flowers to promote plant growth. All right, now let's talk about harvesting your peppers. As you can see, this is the bounty of what I've had in my household these last couple of years. You can see the peppers that are right in front, star of the show. But I do want to mention, before I get to these peppers, um, I have Asian pears right there. But if you can see on the right hand side, what may look kind of like a chayote squash, as I've come to hear from people, that is actually a quince. A quince fruit is a very, very delicious although a little bit bitter fruit, but has a beautiful aroma that does really well in the Pacific Northwest. It is a mixture between an apple and a pear. Again, has a delightful aroma. You can eat this raw. We generally add a little bit of salt to embrace a little bit of that sweeter flavor within the fruit, or you can actually steam them and cook them. So I just wanted to add that as a little bit of a side note. But as you can see, here are some of the peppers, as you know, was mentioned at the beginning of the session here. um, I grow everything from jalapenos, serranos, cayenne, Carolina Reapers, Devil's Tongue, everything in between. I love the challenge of growing fresh and new peppers, making salsas with them. I am a huge lover of salsas because that's what I grew up with. So I like to experiment with different flavors. So this is just a mixture of all the peppers that I harvested early. Generally sweeter peppers that are a little bit a little less spicy on the I forget the index that they use for peppers. Maybe some of you might put it in the chat or know it, but they're a little bit sweeter. They definitely will take about 60 to 90 days from when you've put them, into the ground or in a pot. I will say this, when I talk about 90 to 150 days, I generally mean when you've moved them into a bigger pot, right? So I generally start counting from when I'm moving them here in April. So April, May, June, July, August, I will probably start harvesting my pepper plants by the end of August. I'll have maybe a couple in early August if I'm lucky, but generally most of my harvest will be in the middle, if not the end of August, a few in September. Some will linger on, as I mentioned, into October, but that's generally when my harvest will generally happen. And that's okay with me because I can't grow them any earlier, can't put them out any earlier, don't have the space to grow bigger plants than what I have right now in the picture I shown. So that's generally we'll have a harvest, and when you may expect to have a harvest too, beginning of August. You'll have a few more in the middle of August, but ideally you'll have a good amount of harvest at the end of August, early September. Um, so you'll have some of that for if I think it's Memorial Day or Labor Day, can't remember the date, but yeah, that's when you'll definitely have them. Rule of thumb, make sure that you are harvesting your peppers with pruners or scissors. Don't harvest them with your hands, because if you don't have long enough nails or you can't cut them right, you may damage the plant and enable them from producing more peppers. So simple, just get a pair of scissors, cut it, boom, you're done. Have a bucket next to you when you're plucking your peppers, but never do it by hand because again, you could damage the plant further. Um, One thing I do want to mention, which is a common misconception, is that spiciness doesn't come from the seeds. The seeds are not the reason why they're spicy. If you look at a pepper, you cut a pepper and look at its anatomy, the spiciness is going to be in the veins of the peppers. So if you want to get rid of some of the spice, try to get that vein out as much as possible. But the spiciness is not in the seed. It's a common misconception. I hear all the time, get rid of the seeds and it'll be less spicy. It's not true. If you look at the vein inside the pepper, that's where you're going to find the spiciness. But try it out. All right. So now you may be thinking, well, Ezekiel, if you are producing a high yield of peppers, how do you eat all those peppers? Do you eat all those peppers? What happens to the leftover peppers that you don't eat? Well, I try to eat most of the peppers, but I'll sell them to friends, relatives, in my area. We'll buy peppers. Friends always are asking me, "Hey, are you gonna have this type of pepper? Can you sell me peppers?" Yes, I'd be happy to sell people peppers, but again, always depends on the yield. I want to make sure I have enough for myself. But for those peppers that I don't eat, I am okay with them drying out because in our culture, as you can see in the picture here, fresh to dry has a completely different name and has a completely different flavor profile. As an example, jalapeno peppers will turn into a chipotle pepper. Poblano pepper turns into an ancho pepper, which is a very rich, dark chocolatey flavor, very earthy, very delicious, similar from what a chilaca to a pasilla, which often is considered a chile negro, which again has a beautiful aroma. If you've never cooked with these peppers, do yourself a favor and cook with them, rehydrate them, cook them, make them in your salsa. If you have questions of how to make a salsa with some of these peppers, I am going to put my email down in the chat box and you all can reach out to me and be like, Ezequiel, how do I use some of these peppers in my cooking? Because these look amazing and you're not wrong. They are amazing and I love them. But for us, dry peppers are a staple in our Mexican culture and our Mexican culinary. So we use a lot of these different peppers, especially chile guajillo. Chile guajillo is a staple in our enchiladas, our pozole, our chilaquiles. It gives it a rich, dark color, gives it a little bit of spice, not too much. But if you're a person like myself and wants a little bit of spice in your salsa or in your soups or your chilaquiles, go ahead and do yourself a favor and add yourself a little bit of a chile seco right there. And I will promise you, it will give you that kick that you've been looking for. But this is why we love, planting peppers in my family because we don't throw away anything. We don't, waste anything. What we'll do is we'll let them dry. And there's a couple of ways we do that. With some of the peppers, the room that we have, we will go ahead and tie them to a string and we will hang them up in our garage or hang them out in the living room. And they're there, allow them to dry. We can also put them in a box. If we put them in a box, one or two of them may have a little bit may end up rotting away, but the vast majority of them will dry out. And the nice thing is it takes about 2 to 2 months 3 months for them to dry out, which is perfect for us because that's when we start doing our traditional cooking and our fiestas. When we have the Thanksgivings, we think about our fiestas, our December. We have um, you know uh, Christmas Eve, Christmas, the New Year's. This is when we start using a lot of these traditional dried peppers. So it's something that we're going to continue to use through the winter. And it's just a good way of thinking about not throwing anything away, not wasting anything. We can use them when they're fresh, but we can also use them when they're dry. So we're not wasting nothing. All right, here is something for you all to take away. I know we're kind of ending our time. We have a few minutes, but here is a salsa verde recipe. You can go ahead and screenshot this if not, but I will go through this quickly. 3 serrano peppers. Don't use jalapenos. Jalapenos are very done. They don't have any spice unless you get them nice and right. But if you want that kick, serrano peppers, make sure you grill them in a pan or a comal with tomatillo and garlic. You don't need to add any bit of oil, any spray, anything like that. Give it a nice little char. Don't be afraid to see that nice black char on it. Don't overdo it. You still want to see a little bit of green. Once you have that char, you're gonna make sure that you add tomatillos. The tomatillos you don't want to give them a nice char, but you do want them to change from a green to a nice like yellow green color where they kind of start splitting and they start kind of oozing out a little bit. That is perfect for your tomatillos. When you have all of this combined, add it into a blender with an onion, cilantro, and salt to taste, and you've got yourself a beautiful salsa. But don't forget to add a little bit of water into the salsa so it gets nice and liquidy, but not too much because I like my salsa chunky. You may be a little bit different. You want to probably blend for about 25 to 30 seconds, but that's going to be beautiful salsa verde. Simple as that. Now, if you're thinking about that might be a little bit of spicy, you need to cool down and you're growing cucumbers. You can also make yourself an agua fresca de pepino or cucumber agua fresca. Typically, all you're going to need is peel a couple of cucumbers. I like to keep some of the green on it, mixing it a little bit with about 15, 20 ounces of water, squeeze some limes into the blender, blend it all together, add sugar, and you've got yourself a nice agua fresca de pepino, which is ideal for a good summertime. And if you want to venture out a little bit, Latino culture and a lot of cultures across the world, I know they do this in Africa and some Middle Eastern countries, but Jamaica or hibiscus is a very delicious drink. It's really good for you. And there's actually research out there that shows you that it's actually better for you and hydrates you better than some of the traditional sports drinks that we have in the market. Boil this in hot water or boil it in water and add a little bit of sugar with a little bit of water, and you've got yourself another delicious summer drink. So This is inspired by fresh and traditional peppers, chiles rellenos. Chiles rellenos are from poblano peppers, stuffed with cheese, smothered in eggs, fried. Beautiful. And then we have enchiladas that I mentioned, made with chiles guajillos, gives us that nice, rich, dark color. Again, remember, enchiladas may differ from regions in Mexico, so they may look a little bit different depending on the region you're from. And then I think that's what we have planned for you. But the last thing I want to tell you is get your hands dirty. Don't be afraid to try something. This is my garden to the left. This is my peppers that I plant directly into the ground. You can see everything in the back. That's a date tree in the back. That is also a fig tree in the background. Those two big tall trees back there. But with my different variety of peppers, there's poblano peppers in there, serrano, colas de rata. There is a variety of peppers in just that small plot. I have other areas too. But as you can see, planting is my peppers is my passion. Um, don't be afraid to try something. I think planting should be for everybody. I think it should be more of a common practice. Um, I failed a lot of times the first time I started venturing out on my own as an adult. Not in the guidance of my dad, but I kept practicing, and I finally got it down. Took me a couple of years, but I got it down. It works. It takes a lot of patience, a lot of time, a lot of effort. And if you're afraid to start something from seed, which I know a lot of people are, feel free to buy starters. Starters will start becoming more available towards the end of this month, beginning of May. Buy starters. That's perfectly okay. Work your way up to it, but don't be afraid to try it. I think, like I said, gardening should be for everybody, regardless of the amount of space. You have different options, so make sure that you take advantage of this beautiful summer weather because it will definitely be to your benefit of having something fresh from your garden. So that is my presentation, and I hope you all got something from it. But this is my email right here. If you have any questions, anything like that, please feel free to reach out to me. And again, thank you for your time. I hope that wasn't boring. You got something out of it, so I appreciate your time.
I'm shaking my head because the comments have been, people are really thrilled with what you offered. We do have a whole bunch of questions if you want to unmute and maybe turn your camera on so we can go through some of these questions.
Yeah, I'll do my best. Yeah, I'll do my best. Yeah.
And that salsa recipe, my husband was born and raised in Texas, and he makes that salsa regularly.
Yes.
It's so simple and so wonderful. So I'm just going to start at the top and work down. First thing was you at some point you talked about 70 degrees, and somebody asked, was that 70 degrees for the air or for the soil?
For the air.
That's okay. That was my assumption. Brian has a jalapeno about 5 inches tall indoors.
Yeah.
Has a bunch of tiny white bump-like things under the leaves, and wondering if those are aphids. Sprayed them with neem oil solution once, but is there anything better that he could be doing?
Yeah, there is something that I've actually come across that has actually worked, and I had this issue too a couple of years ago, and excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. But one of the things that I've used also is marigolds. I've actually submerged marigolds into water, left them there for a couple of days, let them get nice and brown, and then after a few days, what I would do is put that in a solution with some soap, spray them, and that did the trick. Just the aroma of the marigolds, they don't like that aroma, so it's definitely something that I've used in the past that has worked out pretty well. But I had that issue a couple of years ago too. Yeah.
Not an uncommon one, as it
No,
turns out.
fortunately, no.
Yep. Jen wants to know, when you up pot from seedling to their first individual pot, what size to use? 4 inches?
4 inches would be fine. Yep, 4 inches would be fine. Yes. Yeah. Nothing bigger than that. I would recommend against.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you transplant into the ground, what fertilizer do you use?
I just use anything simple like an organic Miracle Grow fertilizer, something that's water soluble, just something I can mix in there. But yeah, or organic Miracle Grow is ideal. Yeah, or whatever you can get your hands on.
Do you use black plastic on top of the soil around pepper plants to keep the soil warmer? And what kind of pepper plant support do you use? That's from Cheryl.
I've never used a plastic. I do know people who have used it. It's never been something that I've considered it, but again, moving them out in at the end of May is all I really needed to do for the pepper plants. And I get some people may use it just because if there's that late harvest that they have maybe towards the end of October. But for me personally, I'm harvesting most of my plants by September. But again, this goes back to making sure that we're planting the seeds earlier, better.
Great. Well, this next one, if you can answer, we're going to make you the president of Extension. How to keep squirrels away from garden from digging out the plants. You
Oh,
have the miracle answer.
yeah. Oh, I've actually been very, very lucky with my dog. My
Oh,
dog is, yeah, but my front yard, since it's exposed, trust me, they've have dug up so many tulip, bulbs and everything, and it's hard, but I've heard coffee grounds have worked pretty well for some people, but I don't have the answer. Yeah.
all right. You don't get to be president tonight.
Oh man, maybe next year. Maybe next year.
Maybe next year.
Yeah.
And Jen wonders, have you found there are conditions that will affect the level of spiciness of your peppers?
Ooh. Um, Not necessarily. Not necessarily. One of the things that I have actually tried, because this is a very good question. One of the things I've actually really looked at, and this is when I buy peppers from like I mentioned jalapenos earlier. Jalapenos, if you haven't heard about the story where there was a university in Texas who actually created a strain of jalapenos that was a lot less potent than the normal jalapeno that has been circulating is actually the majority strain now.
Mhm.
But when I get a very, very spicy jalapeno, what I've done is I've actually saved the seeds, allowed them to dry out, and created them, off that batch. So if you have a very spicy pepper that you're eating, save those seeds. Again, this is the drying process, and just go
Mhm.
off of that. And most of my peppers, I can tell you, most of my peppers have been very spicy. Even my jalapenos, I have not missed with my jalapenos in the last 4 to 5 years.
Wonderful. The chart, the slide that you had with the peppers named fresh and then dry.
Yeah,
Claudia and I were commenting, that was fascinating. I was not aware of that drying them also gave them a new name in terms of what you
yeah.
would buy in a store. So
Oh,
what
yeah.
that was, just that one slide was super educational for me.
Yeah, and
Um, sorry.
no, yeah, and provides a new flavor profile. It's just a
And a
different
new,
flavor. Yeah.
yep, yep, great. That was interesting. Somebody commented about the Scoville index, which is used to
Yes.
rate heat of peppers. So,
Yes.
but of course, we in our own home gardens are not measuring. We're just eating.
We're just eating. Yeah, yeah. Yes, yes.
Oh, here's a good question. How do you avoid your salsa becoming foamy in the blender?
Oh, so a couple of things, right? So um a couple of things that I've actually used is the temperature of the water that you're using with, which has its pros and its cons, right? Some of the you can add a little bit room temperature, a little bit of room temperature water, and it will keep the peppers from being foamy. You can actually let the peppers cool down a little bit. I personally love a nice spicy salsa, a nice warm salsa when I'm eating, my food. It typically cools down a little bit faster. But also over blending. Just 30 seconds is all you need, even less than that. Don't overblend it.
Oh, good answer. Interesting. Somebody said, thank you, great information. And I'm gonna look in the chat because I see we have Claudia added some things and some other references, an article that you'd written for extension.
Mhm.
So I encourage people to click through on those. I will mention that we will send out this webinar to attendees and those who signed up that were not here so that they'll get a chance to any of you who are here will get a chance to go through the slides and listen to some of the things that Ezequiel shared with us today again, and maybe screenshot that wonderful slide about the peppers.
Yeah,
We
and I can,
really appreciate you coming today. People were just really there. That's the
yeah,
one that, whoa, yeah. Jalapeno to Chipotle.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, we really appreciate the information you've provided us. As we mentioned at the beginning, and it's in the chat as well, we do have our upcoming IE sale on May the 11th, the day before Mother's Day. If you didn't start your seeds this year, this is your opportunity to purchase some really wonderful organic starts of peppers, and of course, all the others. And thank you so much for giving of your time to us tonight. It was really fun.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I appreciate your time, and I hope you got a little bit of information. And thank you again for being here with
Yep.
tonight. I love doing this. If you ever see me out in the wild, please talk peppers to me.
Thank you.